Shalom, my dear friends. I would like to say a few words having to do with the study of Pirkei Avot, the book of the fathers. This is the time in which the Jewish people studies between Pesach and Shavuot. We study the book that we call in Hebrew Pirkei Avot, the book of the fathers. So far, this week, we have learned the study of the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. Even though in the past I lectured on Pirkei Avot plenty, but now I will just say a word or two about it. Every week, during those 6 weeks, we will study one little message here and there from the book of Pirkei Avot. So we said that we call this book the book of the fathers. Why do we call it the book of the fathers? Who are the fathers? Apparently the Jewish people has only one father. The whole world has only one father. Our father, our king, that's God. But the Talmud says in Masechet Berachot on page 16, it says there that we are not allowed to call anyone by the title Avot, fathers, except three. The three forefathers, the three patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Also, we have only four mothers, the matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Beyond that, we are not allowed to call anyone by the term fathers or mothers. And yet, the book of the fathers is called fathers about whom? Who are the fathers in the book of the fathers? When we look into this book, we see that those are our teachers of old. Beginning with Moses, our first teacher. We don't call him our father Moshe, we call him our teacher Moshe Rabbeinu. And then he gave the Torah to Yehoshua. We don't call Yehoshua our father. And then Yehoshua, as it says in the first paragraph of Pirkei Avot, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. Sarah li Yehoshua, and he gave it to Yehoshua, transmitted to Yehoshua, and Yehoshua transmitted it to the elders, and the elders transmitted it to the prophets, and the prophets transmitted it to Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the great assembly, which consisted of 120 rabbis. And since then, from generation to generation, all the rabbis of the time of the Mishnah, the sages of the Mishnah, and then the sages of the Gemara, and all these are known as fathers, as we call the book Pirkei Avot, in which we will read the messages of our teachers of old. So how come we call them fathers when it stands in direct contradiction with what I have quoted before from the Talmud in Masechet Berachot, that we are not allowed to call anyone fathers or mothers but three fathers and four mothers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And yet now we see that we call a whole book of hundreds of great rabbis that we have in our history, we call them fathers. The answer is very simple. I also read it in a book, Nachalat Avot, by Rabbi Yosef Mesas, alav Shalom, the late chief rabbi of Haifa, and who used to be a great rabbi in Meknes, in Morocco. And he writes, but this is a very, very actual answer. We are not allowed to call anyone fathers in the same vein as we call our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We have only one father. Father is God. But then we call Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov because they always prayed for the Jewish people. They prayed for the Jewish people, so they became our fathers. Among the matriarchs, Rachel is known always to pray for the Jewish people wherever they are, in their exile. And that's why these are known to be our fathers and mothers. But that's the main reason is, as I'm going to say, we come from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. They are our true fathers and mothers. To exclude, of course, the tribes, the 12 tribes. We cannot say that the 12 tribes are our fathers and mothers. No. But why? Because no one knows from which tribe he comes. We don't know anymore. Since the destruction of the temple and the exile from the beginning, we lost track of the 12 tribes, so no one knows in particular with certitude from which tribe he comes. So we cannot call them our fathers. But we know for sure that we come from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, as well as the matriarchs. And I said before regarding the month of Iyar, that the month of Iyar is Aleph, Yud, Resh, which means Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Rachel. Those are the people who prayed for the Jewish people. That's why the month of Iyar is a good month for prayer. Not solely, but for other things also. But we already discussed that in the previous derasha. So now we understand. So what the Talmud says, don't call anyone fathers except for the fathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. If what you have in mind is that they are our fathers because we are from them. We are their children. That is certain. To exclude the tribes from whom we don't know from which tribe do we come. But when it comes to our rabbis, we call them fathers as a title of respect. We owe them respect because you owe respect to your Torah teacher. Our sages say in the Talmud, in Kiddushin and other places, that the Talmid, the student of a Torah student, his teacher is considered to be his father. And our sages said that Talmidim kabanim hem, that the students are your children. Only it's not in the same understanding as we call Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov our fathers, because biologically we come from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But as an act of respect, we call our teachers our fathers. As we found, for example, let's go as far as in the Bible, with the time of Eliyahu the prophet. He had a student. Who was his student, who was to become the greatest prophet after Eliyahu? Elisha. And Elisha, he learned everything from his master Eliyahu. And the time came when Eliyahu had to separate from him, which means to depart the world. And Elisha, according to the Bible, in the book of Kings, right, there it says that Elisha saw him departing and he called him, he said, Avi, Avi, Rechev Shamayim Ufarashav. My father, when he is not his father, but his teacher. So we see, it's possible to call your teacher a father. But even beyond what it says in the Bible, we find in the Talmud that Hillel and Shammai, the great masters of the Jewish people, who lived approximately 2,300 or 400 years ago, those were Hillel and Shammai, and they gave us so many teachings in the Talmud. The Talmud is replete with the teachings of Hillel and Shammai, or the schools of Shammai and Hillel. So they are known in the Talmud as Avot HaOlam, as we find in the Talmud in Masechet Eduyot. Also Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. This month, the month of Iyar, is the month of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right? Because on the 18th of Iyar we are going to celebrate the day of the Hilulah of Rabbi Shimon. Because this year I don't know what kind of celebration is going to be, because of the Corona tragedy. Nobody is allowed to go out of his place. So the hundreds of thousands of people that used to visit the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on the day of Lag BaOmer is not going to be the same this year. So let's hope for the best. But we know that in every year before, hundreds of thousands went up to the mountain of Meron, and they spent that day in prayers near the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai also used to call Hillel and Shammai Avot HaOlam, the fathers of the world, as we find in the Midrash Rabbah Bereshit Rabbah Pe'alef. Also we find that Rabbi Ishmael Kohen Gadol, and Rabbi Akiva, the two great rabbis who always differed in their opinions in the Talmud. We find them so many times in the Talmud with their different opinions. They are known as Avot HaOlam, as we find in the Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechet Shkalim. And also Rabbi Tarfon. If you look into the Gemara in Masechet Baba Metziah on page Peh 85, you will see that Rabbi Tarfon, one of the great sages of the Mishnah, one of the most ancient sages of the Mishnah, he was known as Avihem Shel Kol Israel, the father of all the Jewish people. So again, as I said before, we refer to them as fathers as a matter of respect, not or biological, but rather a matter of respect. Let me just add one thought that is, to my humble opinion, is extremely important today to hear. The question is the following. So we know that Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe received the Torah at the mountain of Sinai, which means, and he gave it, of course, to the Jewish people. We all know that. So the Jewish people received the Torah when? In the wilderness of Sinai. They received it at the mountain of Sinai, and then they spent close to 4 years in the wilderness learning that Torah. I remember the words of Rabbi Avigdor Miller, Alav Shalom, who used to say that the biggest yeshiva of all time was those 4 years in the wilderness, in which the Jewish people did not work, did not have to worry about anything except the learning of Torah. They were learning Torah constantly. So imagine when they entered the land of Israel, they were already Torah scholars of the first category. So the question is, why is it that God gave the Torah in the wilderness of Sinai? Don't you think it would have been more plausible that he should give the Torah when they enter the land of Israel? Well, the answer is, there probably are many answers to this, but I saw the answer by Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, the great posek of all times. I remember him, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, the famous Rosh Yeshiva of Tiferet Moshe in Brooklyn, in New York. Even today is known as one of the greatest poskim who decide the halacha. And he writes in his book Darash Moshe, he writes the following. He says, it was so important that God gives the Torah to the Jewish people in the wilderness before they enter the land of Israel. If he waited until they enter the land of Israel, as soon as they go into the land of Israel, there are immediately other obligations that they didn't have in the wilderness. For example, to work the land. Also, to now immediately you are under the obligation to fulfill the commandments that pertain to the land of Israel, such as the Ma'asrot, the tithes, the terumot, all the laws that pertain to the land of Israel. How can they start now doing the mitzvot if they didn't have a background of Torah? It would be impossible for them to start fulfilling all the commandments. It's impossible. So what did Hashem do with his great wisdom? He gave them a full education before they enter the land of Israel, an education of Torah. You give them an education of Torah for 4 years before they enter the land of Israel. By the time they enter the land of Israel, they are well prepared for all the commandments. Besides all the commandments, now they have the proper weaponry with which to contend with their evil inclination. The evil inclination is there anyway, but at least they have the proper weapons with which to fight it. To fight what? All the prohibitions, all the terrible things that the world allowed himself to do, to eat anything you want, to do anything you want, the dishonesty all over. While the evil inclination is everywhere, among the good and among the bad one, nevertheless, when you have a background of Torah, then you know what is forbidden and what is not forbidden. That gives you already a certain power over yourself. Now, depending on you and on how much you overcome your urges and your temptations, but at least you do, in most cases you do the best you can. Unlike a person who did not have a background of Torah, how can you expect from him to suddenly start observing the commandments of the Torah, or observing the things that even logic says that you should not have? Because a person who has no Torah, he thinks he is allowed to do anything he wants. Of course, there are things that logic says you should not do it. But what about the other things, such as eating the non-kosher things? Or doing things that are totally, like such adultery and things like this, or stealing, or lashon hara, and so forth. How can you prevent yourself without the background of Torah? And that's Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says, that's the reason that it is of the utmost importance to begin the Torah education of your child even when he is at his most tender age, even before the age of the observance, which is the age of bar mitzvah. Many years before, you have to start already teaching him the importance of the Torah, to teach him some of the Torah, to teach him commandments, even though he is not obliged by them, but you give him that education. You also give him the education of how one controls himself. You give him the education of knowing what is good, what is moral, what is not moral. You give him the education of knowing that you have urges that are to be forbidden, and you have to know how to control them. Anger, for example. You have to suppress your anger. How do you do it if you don't have a Torah education? The same thing also with other traits of moralities, such as humbleness, modesty, not arrogance, God forbid, or also talking lashon hara, gossip, bad gossip. If you inculcate into the heart of a young child, before he reaches the age of action, of responsibility, such as the age of bar mitzvah, then he is well ready. By the time he reaches bar mitzvah, he knows what are his obligations. So you give him the weapon with which to contend with whatever is going to be in him. You know, the invasion of the evil inclination, yetzer hara. But a family that is not religious at all, we call them chilonim. The non-religious families who did not give any religious education to their children, how can they expect their children to behave? I mean, to do whatever has to be done. Let's assume that the days is coming that we will finally know where is the truth. And let's say the world will open its mouth and know, oh my God, that's the truth. Now we understand why God forbade the Jewish people to eat certain things that are not kosher. And they will know, right, what is true, what is not. But then what? Their child doesn't know. He did not receive the proper education. So when he understands what is the truth and he stands there not knowing what to do, whom is he going to blame if not his parents? And Moshe Feinstein says, please be careful, even if you are not religious, that I am adding, even if you are not religious, but understand this. This is a matter of being wise. give your child as much as as much as possible in Torah education. His obligations of the observances, the prohibitions, kabedet avicha ve'et imecha, the ten commandments, and so forth and so forth. This way, when he grows up, maybe the world will change, and he will finally see the truth. What will you answer to your child when he tells you, my fathers and mother, you are to blame for not giving me anything? See, God gave the Torah to the people of Israel at the wilderness of Sinai, 40 years before they entered the land of Israel. Why is that? So that when they enter the land of Israel, they are ready. Same thing also with the education of every child. At least give him that with which he can be ready in the future. But just because you are not religious, you are a family of no religion, right? And you allow yourself to do the same with your child, the day will come when you will have to answer your child. So my friends, let us use our wisdom, natural wisdom. That's all it takes to understand what is an obligation and what is not. God bless you, my friends, and be well. And may Hashem bring upon us the days in which we will open our eyes to know what is the truth. It is true that it's not easy to know the truth. There are too many questions. But one thing will stand always before us. Just in case, the question is, just in case I am wrong, what will I say? So therefore, do the best you can with your child and with yourself. This way, somehow, they will be ready to start a life which is going to become the obligation of the days. In our time, maybe. God bless you.